life. We're on our Bible readings and comments, and we've come to 1 Corinthians 13, one of the great chapters in all the Bible, the love chapter. Let's examine this. There's some things in here that we can overlook easily if we're not careful, but we want to be careful. So thanks for being tuned in, and let's start up with 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, Paul has been talking about spiritual gifts in chapter 12, and the Corinthians were all enamored with tongue speaking. He gives some rules for that in 1 Corinthians, among other things. That things be done decently and in order, and that if that's not an interpreter, don't. And he says, I'm going to show you more excellent ways, better gifts, and all in all, things that are better than gifts, which is what leads us to chapter 13. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. So that gift that they coveted, they tended to not use as it was supposed to be used for communication, for people who spoke another language that you didn't speak, and such like. So if you were speaking in a tongue and the people there say they're speaking Greek, like you do, and you're speaking in Latin, if somebody's not there to interpret, don't do it, because the gift served a very functional purpose. It faded away, as I believe the spiritual gifts did, and we will look at that. As the church began to grow and learning languages and having people from various language groups became readily available. So anyway, start again. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels but do not have love, I become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, which he considered to be one of the better gifts because it was a teaching gift, and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. That needs to be preached, taught, and understood, because people commonly brag about, or maybe not bragging, but want to take note of, I did this, I did that sometimes, and other people don't. And sometimes the spirit of love is not present. And Paul says if it isn't, forget about it. What you're doing is just a bunch of noise in God's ear. So that's how he starts out. So what is love? What's a good definition? What are we talking about that we're supposed to have? Otherwise, everything else we do is invalidated. Well, let's look and see. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous, does not brag, and is not arrogant. Does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not easily provoked. Does not take into account a wrong suffered. It's pretty tough stuff here. Kind of demanding. Does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Believes all things. Hopes all things. Endures all things. Love never fails. Now, he's been talking about spiritual gifts. He's talking about the unfailing nature of love. And so in that context, he says, but if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect, bad translation, but it's tradition and it's been that way for so long, but when the complete comes, the partial will be done away. Well, what's the complete? Jesus in John 14 and in John 16 said that the Spirit, when he came, would give all truth, would give all things. Jude, writing toward the end of that, as I saw about to come to an end, says, contend earnestly for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. Ephesians 4:11 through 16 shows that process that is working toward that completion, which is the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, the measure and stature which belong to the fullness of Christ. So with that said, what Paul is doing now, as he's revealing, and a lot's been revealed, New Testament hasn't come together yet, and it won't be published as a unit for a while. But the word's out there, and it's getting out there, and soon what needs to be out there will be out there. But he says, but when the complete comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. Social commentary here. When I was growing up, I was born in 1948, and my father was born in 1910. People grew up faster. My dad's Brown High School in Atlanta yearbook. People look like they're about 45. I look kind of my age, I guess, and today people look like they're about 8. No, that's an exaggeration, as you well know. But maturity, because of the culture and whatnot, is something that people don't grow up like they used to. Sometimes I think some of them never do. Now, there were some back in my day that never did either. But he's making a point. When the scriptures were being revealed and they were in their partial state, it was like a state of childhood in the church as they're growing to their maturity in Jesus. The faith once for all delivered to the saints. He says, when I became a man, I put away childish things. So he's saying we are working toward receiving the whole, complete, all things, all truth that Jesus said would come in the ministry of the Holy Spirit during the apostolic ministry, which died in the first century, that we would then be in a place where, as the Ephesian writer talks about, we're no longer to be children, tossed about by all these winds of doctrines and crafty scheming that false teachers have, but speaking the truth in love, grow up in all things to him who is the head, Christ. And that's getting close to happening as Paul is writing in these epistles. And so he said, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I will know fully just as I have been fully known. Jesus said, the Holy Spirit is going to fully give you the truth, completely give you the truth, all things. That ministry took a while. There were spiritual gifts supporting that. Hebrews chapter 2 talks about how we've received a better covenant. We must pay closer attention to it because God revealed it and confirmed it with miracles. So it's revealed and confirmed with the truth. After it's been confirmed, it speaks for itself. You remember when Jesus had his conversation with who we call Doubting Thomas, which is actually unfair. And he said, I'm not going to believe until I see him and put my hand in the holes of his body. So Jesus comes. He says, go ahead, do that. He says, my Lord and my God. And at that point, Jesus says, blessed are you because you believe and you've seen. Blessed are those who believe and yet have not seen, which is going to be most of us. We're not going to get to see Jesus. We're not going to see walking on water. We're not going to see raising the dead. But if we have faith, which is what we're supposed to have, the Bible testifies to itself, it validates itself, it shows itself to be from God. And that's how things move on. The world of the first century in the church, it's not the world of today for various reasons. We could go on and elaborate on that, but I'm just going to kind of leave it at that because the chapter pretty much is dealing with the spiritual gifts that they were business using and abusing, and him saying, Paul, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And he said, basically, I'm going to show you the way of love. And all these spiritual gifts that you're clamoring over, if you don't have love, they don't even count. And, by the way, those things are part of the developing stage of the church, the incomplete stage, haven't reached its maturity yet. And when the maturity is reached, when we have those things that are the measure and stature of Christ that the Ephesian letter talks about, and we can grow up in all things into him who is Christ, then that's what we're supposed to do. And then he says, but now abide faith, hope, and love, these three. But the greatest of these is love, as we saw at the beginning of the chapter. Without it, everything's invalidated. We're just making a lot of noise. So let's take this to heart. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. He said the greatest two commandments were to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. That's the truth. And if we can't get that part of it right, the rest of it really doesn't matter. In fact, it's offensive if it's not in the context of love. So faith, hope, and love abide. Faith and hope in a world that has not seen its consummation as yet. Jesus hasn't come back. Love will always obey because God's very nature is fundamentally defined by love. We will have sight when Jesus returns, and so we will see rather than trust him. And that hope will be realized. What we want, what we've been looking forward to, what we're supposed to be showing to people as we live, 1 Peter 3:15, will now be realized as we live with God forever. So it's a great chapter, and it's a very challenging chapter. Often the discussion gets into things about spiritual gifts. I think that's rather straightforward too. But the main thing is love, because without it, nothing counts. Everything in Christianity is predicated on love. The greatest commandments, whether we're going to obey Jesus or not, how we're going to treat one another, and so forth. So let's spend our time really delving in those things and grow up into the things that are now ours in the complete story the Holy Spirit gave to us of all things and all truth. Appreciate you listening. Come by and see us at Lenoir City. If you get a chance, you got any questions, please let us know. We will try to give you a biblical answer. At any rate, thank you.